Good morning. This is Andrew Smith. I am a citizen of Tennessee, and it is Saturday, March 12th, 2022. I've been an instructor in Tennessee public higher education for 24 years. I currently work at Tennessee Tech University in Cookeville, where I am the president of our campus chapter of the American Association of University Professors. My professional academic training is in writing, literature, and theology. I have advanced degrees from Middle Tennessee State in Murfreesboro and from Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And I hold the rank of senior instructor at Tennessee Tech, and I have tenure here at Tennessee Tech. And I've been a classroom instructor and a campus activist my whole life and my whole career. I want to speak today, as I've already done in a couple of live streams, about the Divisive Concepts legislation that is currently making its way through the Tennessee legislature. Just to be clear, it passed the Tennessee House on Monday, March 7th by a vote of 67 to 24, and it is on schedule to go before the Tennessee Senate on Monday, March 14th. And we expect that this is going to pass the Tennessee Senate on this coming Monday. So this is poised to become law. And just to make myself abundantly clear, this is the law that affects what we do at our job in the classroom as a regular part of our duties as instructors and professors here in Tennessee higher education. A similar law already passed for Tennessee K through 12 instructors. This is only the Tennessee higher ed law to which I'm speaking today. And also similar laws with almost identical language have been proposed and passed in other state legislatures across the United States. And so this is part of a concerted movement. And overall, this is a part of the movement that goes under the name critical race theory panic, if you will. Now, I'm speaking today as a citizen of Tennessee who voted for votes in the election for these people that represent me, and I'm not officially speaking in my capacity as an instructor or even as my capacity as president of AAUP, but we are optimistic that AAUP, in concert with other organizations statewide and nationwide, will challenge this law in the courts. It looks to me that we have no way to stop the law now. The law is going to pass. And so what my purpose of this video this morning is to go through the exact wording in the law and some of my larger claims against the law. I don't think I've spoken yet as forthrightly as I could to the real intellectual and moral catastrophe, the utter ridiculousness and stupidity and obnoxiousness and outrageousness of this law. This law is an affront to my professional obligations. And let me just say that I've dabbled in academia, I've dabbled in religion and theology, and I've dabbled in activism. And in every case, the job of the professor, when I was working in a church, the job of the preacher, really the job actually of anyone who is placed before a podium is to tell the truth. This is the sort of, underlying thing. And I think these elected officials actually have, sworn by oath that they would uphold, the Constitution and these founding documents. And so they're really encumbered to tell the truth as well. And this bill is a lie. The bill is a lie that is built on, a stack of lies. And it would require, if we were to follow this bill faithfully to its letter, it would require us to continue lying. And I can't do that. So I'm here this morning to just kind of talk some truth, in my opinion, about this law. And this law cuts at the core of who we are as residents on Turtle Island. On here I sit on former Cherokee land, ancestral land of Cherokees. Tennessee comes from a word, an indigenous word meaning the sacred gathering place. And so my feet are on the soil, the property that my wife and I, the small property that we own and that she owns also in East Tennessee, this is all ancestrally land of indigenous nations and groups. So long ago when I was young, when I was a 20-something activist, maybe even a teenage activist, I learned the saying, America was built by the blood of slaves and on Indian graves. I know that General Sherman said to President Grant, William Tecumseh Sherman said to President Ulysses S. Grant, quote, "First clear off the buffalo, then clear off the Indian. We must act with vindictive earnestness against the Sioux, even to their total extermination, men, women, and children." And so is it true that Black folks, men and women and children, were taken against their will from their ancestral homeland in Africa, brought to this Turtle Island and forced to labor without wage, under the threat of the whip and other punishment and rape and other horrible encounters, to provide free labor to build up the wealth of the aristocracy, former aristocracy of the South? Was the Civil War not a war between the northern rich and the southern rich, the northern rich who wanted low wage labor and the southern rich who wanted free labor? Did we, in fact, have a manifest destiny where we moved westward, where our ancestors who are of European descent decimated this land? Was it, in fact, a genocide? And this strikes at the core of what this bill is about. Are we allowed to talk about these topics openly, transparently, and honestly? And what I think what we're getting at the core of the people who are standing behind this legislation here in Tennessee and throughout the United States, what we're getting at here is a swirl of possible narratives when dealing with the facts of settler colonialism and systemic racism. And so these facts are swirled around in narratives that look something like this. Well, that was bad. That was really bad, but that was back then. Or it actually really wasn't that bad. Or that was bad, but that was the responsibility of a handful of bad actors for whom all of the moral weight is isolated and sequestered on those individuals at that time with no connection to their context or their community or their country. So it wasn't really based on bad ideas or bad ideology or bad political will or bad theology and bad religion about bringing the white God to the red people or to convert the African ancestor slaves into Christians to serve the vision of a white Jesus. It had nothing to do with any of that. There was not any Bibles or any guns or any diseases or any mass murders or massacres. It's just a handful of bad actors. And so it was bad, but it was back then. It really wasn't that bad. It was just a handful of bad actors, but really, like, we don't need to talk about it because that was then and this is now. It actually bears no resemblance to what we're currently going through in the United States today. I would beg to differ. And then you have a handful of at least honest white supremacist, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous thinkers who say, actually, no, actually Western style white colonialism and imperialism is actually a good thing. The white Western people of European descent domination of the globe is actually a good thing. And actually, we need more of this. This is kind of the Tucker Carlson approach, the Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump approach to all world problems is actually, no, we're right to do this. This was a good thing for the world. And so they say it just really wasn't that bad, or we've tweaked it and amended it in such a way that now it's okay. And look at all the good we've done for the Black community. Look at all the good we've done for the Indigenous community. And now the United States actually apologized to the Indigenous community. So now it's okay. We get a reset. We hit a reset button and it's just fine now. And everything's hunky-dory. And if it were hunky-dory, I'm not exactly sure why we'd need a law prohibiting talking about it, how it's not okay, and how history is embedded in the present, and we bear some responsibility to deal with the collective inheritance of our ancestral realities as black, white, red, brown, yellow. The Rainbow Coalition of America needs to deal with this, right? That's what I would say. Okay, so let me just go through the law very, very quickly. It says that divisive concepts, this is the law that passed, and I'll just try to go through this fairly quickly. This is going to be a fairly long stream as it is anyway. If you have to get off now, it'll be archived, and I'll post it also on YouTube later. But they've defined that a divisive concept is something that exacerbates or inflames divisions. We already have divisions, right? So the divisions already exist. And so the divisive concept is not this sort of, free agent that comes in from outside that's just been sort of made up. This is just already in existence. And so I'm not exactly sure what they mean by exacerbate and inflame. I guess the division already exists. And so if you talk about it, you're only making it worse. And so they say that this is contrary to the unity of the United States of America and the well-being of its citizens. And so what the law is saying is essentially is we need to impose unity upon a divisive context. And it's only one form of unity. It's the peace or else of the group that's in power, which is the white Christian nationalist Republican Party of 2022, which is very different than the Republican Party of 2002 or of 1982 or of 1960, when there was a time when the Republican Party in this country was very, very different. So this white Christian nationalist Republican Party is going to impose unity on the United States of America and try to root out the divisive concepts that exacerbate and inflame divisions. I think the divisions already exist. If we talk about them honestly, we have to talk about them in reality, not in a fantasy. And I think that this law is based on a fantasy of a kind of America that doesn't exist and has never existed, and they can't make it exist by passing this law, but they can try to chill speech on our campuses, the one context where free exchange of ideas should be celebrated on all facets. These divisive concepts that are essentially being outlawed include the idea that people, by virtue of our ancestral reality, bear responsibility for actions committed in the past. A lot of the folk who are promoting this are Christians. Okay, so then they're evangelical conservative Christians. A lot of the people who are promoting this bill, Representative Gant, who was presiding over its passage in the House the other day. If you go on Representative's Facebook page, it's, Republican talking point, Bible verse, Republican talking point, Bible verse, God bless you, bless your heart. And so I find it strange, and as a trained theologian in the Reformed tradition, I really think it's strange that these people got a problem with original sin, that we bear no responsibility. They teach in doctrine that every human being bears the responsibility of what Adam and Eve did in the garden, y'all. Every single human being bears ancestral responsibility to a mythopoetic legend about some fruit and a snake in the garden, yo. So this concept of inherited responsibility is not new to the Christian. And as somebody who likes Jesus and somebody who likes the stories that I learned as a child and the hymns of the liberation hymns of the Black church in America, the African-American church, the liberation theology tradition, I'll talk Bible with you all day long. Don't say there is peace when there is no peace. I think your Jesus comes not to bring unity, but to bring a sword and to divide father and mother against another, child against parent, parents against child. Jesus is a divisive concept, yo. So don't come at me with this, well, we can never have no divisive concepts because it goes against this unity that does not exist. All right. And for all my secular friends and siblings, I apologize for the preacherly diversion here, but I find that this fundamentally contradicts itself. I think the law violates itself. The law is against itself, and they've pitted themselves against themselves. And I think we need to stand up to this thing, and hopefully it will be beat back in the courts, where we hope to challenge it with a lawsuit. They cannot say that there's a meritocracy. This is that meritocracy could be in any way based on racism or sexism. Well, again, look at the statistics of how many white males are cis, and I'm speaking as a cis cisgender heterosexual white guy. So think about how many people that look like me and have the same sexual orientation as me and maybe the same background as me are in positions of power disproportionate to minorities of all kinds, women, queers, Black and brown siblings, indigenous siblings. And so it's not really, it's not factual, and so they say that these inherently oppressive meritocracies don't exist and you can't talk about them, but they do exist. And the academic facts are there. So again, you have to lie about this, you have to lie about that. And you cannot allow somebody to feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress because of discussion of these. Now here, and Representative Johnson, she pulled this part out. Some of our Democrats spoke against this before it passed, and it passed on Monday by a vote of 67 to 24. She said this is a highly subjective thing to weaponize the individual discomfort, guilt, anguish, or psychological distress of an individual in a workplace, such as an institution of higher learning. And some of the content, though this is not the primary purpose of the content, but it's embedded in difficult and challenging content, that it will cause discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress. And so you cannot really get away from this reality of discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological stress. It goes with the territory. It is germane to the curriculum, and how we deal as teachers when we notice that a student is experiencing discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological stress is upon us professionally to use those teachable moments in a compassionate and a constructive way, and not to shame or blame people for being real with where they're at. But we can't go in there with this fairy tale kindergarten fantasy lie that America is something that it isn't, simply because it fits your political narrative. And I guarantee you, if quote unquote the other side came in with a law like this, you would know it to be the totalitarianism that it actually is. And so you all every day talk to me on my computer here about what you perceive as left-wing totalitarianism. We see it all day, every day. And so this is totalitarianism. This is McCarthyism. This is Putinism here in Tennessee. And it's set up to present your perception of that already happening from the left. Well, the left are not in power in Tennessee. I mean, this is a time after an ascendant white supremacist autocrat president Trump. Trumpism reigns in Tennessee right now, much more severely than it did even a generation ago before we had Trumpism. When George W. Bush was president, it was problematic because of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. But this is nothing like what we experienced between 2016 and 2020. And there's a grassroots populist white nationalist Christian white nationalist movement in this country that is being galvanized by these legislations. And so this idea that somehow the left is running Tennessee it's preposterous. And our upper level administration officials in Tennessee public higher education are connected to the Republicans in power. They're appointed by the Republicans in power. The people that sit on their boards are connected to the Republicans in power. So Tennessee public higher education is not held hostage by some, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden conspiracy, much less a Cory Bush, AOC, Bernie Sanders conspiracy. The state's run by Republicans, and they're essentially attempting to sort of, insert this fantastical narrative about what America is into advanced academics, where in history and anthropology and psychology and literature and the humanities, theology, my other discipline, where there's a whole countervailing narrative. And when we teach that countervailing narrative, we don't teach it as absolute, because we're not the absolutists. We believe in nuance and discussion and contestation. I don't believe that any truth is beyond the scrutiny of the verification processes germane to that discipline. We have to test our hypotheses. Hey, class, there's a dialectic going on. There's a thesis and an antithesis, and we're going to a synthesis. There's no, always already, absolute truth about what is anything in the discipline of the humanities, history, literature, anthropology, psychology, theology. So the humanities teachers were upset about this because it doesn't make any sense. We are not allowed to say that the United States is fundamentally or irredeemably racist or sexist. Well, actually, the facts of systemic racism and sexism are knitted and stitched into the founding of this country and into the settler colonial imperial conquest of this continent. And we are on many cases either ceded or unceded ancestral lands of First Nations, and they were not successful in a complete genocide. It was a form of genocide. Scholars say that it was genocide. It was probably genocide, but it wasn't a complete genocide. And so there are remaining First Nations people who hold tenderly and gently to their traditions, and they are the ancestors of the ghost dance, and they hold to this thing, and they know about Wounded Knee. They know about, you know, the resource extraction that is happening on their land to profit big business even today. We know in the South, on the ancestral land of the slave owner, that there is still profit being extracted from that plantation system. And so it's still going. And then I'm not even talking about police brutality or the prison industrial complex. And so the realities come to bear. But the United States is racist and sexist in the building of the system. And by acknowledging that, we build the beloved community. The beloved community is a construct that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. proposed, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. proposed in his work, where we would address the triplicate evil of militarism, racism, and out of control materialism or capitalism. And so in building the beloved community, which is democratic socialism, which is anti-racism, which is anti-war, we live in a new reality and in a new world. And that is the dream that he preached about on the Washington Memorial. The dream was not a capitulation to the one quote they take out of context, that you do not judge a person by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It's not an individualist. King's message was about systemic racism, and it was about a beloved community that would be available to all and not just to some. The idea that you cannot talk about power relationships and historical struggles is in this law. Power relationships and historical struggles is what the whole thing is about, and has always been about. Politics is about an understanding of power and powerlessness and who holds it and who doesn't. And those of us from a democratic tradition, we want shared power. We want democratically shared power from the bottom up. We want workers to have democratic power in the workplace, and we want people, regardless of their economic status, to have a vote and to have a voice in society, even the poor, lifting up the poor. And to do this law, then they want to get rid of trainings, seminars, workshops, and orientations that talk about any of these ideas. They furthermore want to outlaw any idea that we support, believe, or endorse, embrace, or confess, or act upon, or otherwise assent to any of these divisive concepts. So it's one, you can't talk about this anymore. This is, like I said, McCarthyism, Putinism, censorship. So you cannot talk about these concepts, but then moreover, you cannot ask anyone to believe, endorse, support, embrace, confess, or act upon any of these concepts. And so this is an attempt to chill speech, which is, of course, immoral and illegal. And like I said, I hope we strike it down in the courts. But then once we've done that, it's said that you can't actually do anything about it. You can't learn about it. But if you did learn about it by accident because the teacher got away with it anyway, or the class all consensually agreed to break this law in the classroom anyway and go forward with the actual syllabus instead of some, you know, fantastical fairy tale syllabus that the lawmakers would like us to have. But then if you learn something about it, you can't do anything about it. Furthermore, a student or employee of a public institution of higher education cannot be required to endorse a specific ideology or political viewpoint. Well, that's good, right? Let me read that again. A student or employee of a public institution of higher learning cannot be required to endorse a specific ideology or political viewpoint. This law is a specific ideology or political viewpoint. And so therefore, this law breaks its own law. Okay? They don't want my specific beloved community, Martin Luther King inspired democratic socialist ideology or political viewpoint to be allowed in the classroom. That's very clear. And I teach a class, an upper division class on the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and I cannot teach that class honestly under this law, which is why I'm talking about it now. Full transparency. I'm not hiding nothing from nobody. Okay. But this law is a specific ideology or political viewpoint. So therefore, this law breaks its own tenet. It should be nullified and annihilated from these papers, should be shredded in the paper shredder of all time in history and removed from the docket. Unfortunately, it's on the docket for this Monday, this coming Monday. Then, what then? Well, what we're going to see, let me just break this down for you all. I've been wanting to say all this. It's hard. It's heavy on my heart. I work at a university, and I predict, I could be wrong. And when I'm wrong, I like to admit it. Okay. I don't like to live on a lie, so I could be wrong, but I predict that your institution of higher learning, if you're like me at Tennessee Tech, or you're at Middle Tennessee and Murfreesboro, or some of the other publics, maybe not University of Tennessee Knoxville, because University of Tennessee Knoxville has the Critical Race Collective. They have a whole consortium of faculty who endorse critical race theory as their guiding pedagogy. Now, there's about 30 or 40 faculty that are part of this Critical Race Collective. I've not heard from them. I'm going to reach out to them. I want to hear from them what they think of this law, how they're going to resist this law on their campus over there in Knoxville. But what I predict is going to happen on my campus and might happen on your campus, you're on one of the other more medium-sized publics, is they're going to downplay this. Even Representative Gant, when he got asked a question, can you teach about Selma, or can you teach about slavery, or can you even, somebody even asked him, can you teach critical race theory? And he said yes, right? Which is exactly everything in the law is critical race theory, right? So if you understand what CRT is, that's what the law is addressing. But he said, oh, no, you can teach that. So you're going to get, I think some of the professional administrators on your campus are going to try to downplay this law. And it's just not a big deal. Don't change anything. You're fine. You're fine, Mr. Smith. That's Martin Luther King Jr. He's a good Baptist preacher. Kumbaya. It's going to be okay. You can keep teaching your class on MLK. It's going to be okay, son. It's going to be okay. So what are the consequences of this law in practice? It says an individual who believes that a violation has occurred may pursue all equitable and legal remedies that may be available to the individual in a court or competent jurisdiction. They are begging you to sue your professor. Let's just get this right. They are begging you to sue your teacher if, what did it say? If they make you feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress because of these divisive concepts. And of course, they're going to say this is anti-white. This is reverse racism. And so if a person is in a class where systemic racism, which is anti-black and white supremacist, is discussed, and it makes a white person feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress, they're begging you to sue us. Sue your teacher. Sue your teacher. Bring forth all equitable and legal remedies that may be available. You cannot incentivize us to learn about these concepts. You cannot incentivize us to put the divisive concepts into our academic curricula. If you already have at your campus an employee whose primary duty is diversity. And so in many of your campuses, and I'm in a majority white campus, we have appointed officials who are committed to diversity on our campus who are African American. Their duties must now explicitly include efforts to, quote, strengthen and increase intellectual diversity. Strengthen and increase intellectual diversity. So they're basically saying, diversity really means more right-wing ideas on this allegedly left-wing campus. Okay, so first of all, this alleged left-wing campus doesn't really exist in Tennessee and in the Deep South. It just doesn't. Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Oklahoma, Arkansas, my colleagues in Texas, in Kentucky. Tell me, does this campus exist on any of your public campuses? This like completely top to bottom communist campus? It does not exist. It's a fantasy. It's made up. It's a bogeyman. Check the political affiliations of your board of trustees and of your presidents and your top officials and your vice presidents. And of course, we have many vice presidents. It'll take you a minute to check on all because every campus has got like a whole coterie of vice presidents. They're Republicans across the board. I predict you're going to discover the board of trustees and the presidents are working with their Republican legislatures hand in toe, just, high five and fist bump. They do. Okay. Then they're going to require, so they're requiring us to teach diversity of thought. And they're going to require a survey of the political affiliations of your campus and then publish those on the institution's website. So, and then there was an amendment to the law. I know I'm on a roll here. I will be finishing this up soon. There was an amendment to the law. And the amendment says that a student or employee of a public higher education shall not be penalized, discriminated against, or receive any adverse treatment to refuse to support, believe, or embrace, or confess upon any one of these divisive concepts. Well, since the law itself is a divisive concept and I refuse to support, believe, endorse, embrace, confess, or act upon it, I mean, I'm being ironic here, y'all, because I don't think this is what they mean, right? But I believe that that if they don't let me teach my class the way I am professionally trained to teach a class on Martin Luther King Jr. or American literature, where these divisive concepts are present, that they cannot penalize, discriminate, or give me any adverse treatment for my refusal to support, believe, endorse, embrace, confess, or act upon the ideology of this law. See what's going on here? I don't think that's what they meant. I think that they mean it only the other way. This is a one-way street. It goes right. This one-way street goes right and then further right. That turn right and stay right. That's what they actually mean. And y'all know that's what they actually mean. It's not ambiguous, this thing at all. A student or employee of a public institution of higher education shall not be required to endorse a specific ideology or political viewpoint to be eligible for hiring, tenure, promotion, or graduation. Well, actually, it sounds like we do. We have to assent to this law, which is ideological, or we cannot. So the law itself does against what the law proposes to do. At the back of the amendment, if they receive a complaint, they must act upon the complaint in 10 days with every colleague as my witness. Nothing in higher education academic happens in 10 days. We move a little bit more slowly and a little bit more deliberately than that. In 10 days. In 10 days. It must be acted upon in 10 days if there's a complaint. We don't do anything in 10 days. We're slow. We're professors. We argue. We check our phones in meetings. We have a million Zooms. We have a think tank. We have a exploratory committee to discuss and propose, and then it has to go through all the different academic councils, and nothing happens in 10 days on it. But within 10 days, you will be investigated for a violation of this law. The first violation will be a written reprimand, and the second violation will terminate the employee. The second violation, you're going to get fired. There's another bill that's on the docket for Tuesday in the subcommittee for higher education that deals with tenure. It's what's called a caption bill. A caption bill is where they don't put the actual bill in there. They just get it on the schedule and it's left blank. They did a caption bill on abortion. It turned out last week, it's in the subcommittee for health, that the caption bill on abortion is to ban abortion in Tennessee and to do a headhunter law to criminalize abortion providers in Tennessee and send them to jail and give them a massive amount of fines. This reactionary anti-choice bill was a caption bill, and so they just dropped on you. This caption bill on tenure is supposed to drop on this coming Tuesday. I promise you I'm going to do another lot. If it's what we think it's going to be, which is going to be basically to create tenure in name only like they did in Georgia last year, to make tenure subject to post-tenure reviews where the meaning of tenure no longer exists because you can be fired without a proper hearing. I almost got fired last year, class friends. Oh, man. I'm sorry. I just have to delete the whole video now. I just called my my Facebook fans and friends and colleagues class. This isn't class. I'm off the clock. Totally off the clock here. Totally speaking as a citizen, not in my role as an employee, not as the president of the AAUP. Oh my goodness. So I almost got fired last year. And one of the reasons they couldn't fire me is because I have tenure. And with tenure, there would have to have been a series of hearings which would have been adjudicated by my peers. And in that hearing, my peers would have had to have voted to terminate me. As far as I know, there's never been such a hearing since I've been here with any of my tenured colleagues. That maybe was a bar too high over a leaflet that I hung on a wall. I made on my own computer, on my own time, at my own home, and I printed the leaflet on my own printer and posted it on a wall on the campus. And they got surveillance footage of me hanging it on my wall. They got a video of me hanging the flyer on the wall at school, and they wanted to fire me for it, but they didn't because of the protection of academic tenure. This new law that's coming up on Tuesday is going to deal with tenure. I'm almost done. So, call it critical race theory. Call it systemic racism. Call it original sin. It goes by different names. This attempt to describe reality, to tell the truth. That's all this is. This is just professors trying to tell the truth. Just because we were not alive back then, this does not mean we do not bear some responsibility, some moral duty even, to deal with the consequences. The law said we have no moral responsibility for the past. I can't get with that. That feels dishonest to me. I think we all bear responsibility for the past. And it's not, I don't take individual blame for something that I didn't do. I do enough stupid things on my own. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm a sinner. I'm a broke down middle-aged dude. I've done a lot of dumb things in my life. And when I make a mistake today, I try to fess up and confess and accept the consequences and make amends as are needed. We as Americans have collective responsibility for this lineage, and what we do with it is the greatest opportunity. After the murder of George Floyd, we were given such a great opportunity to change the narrative for the better, and what we've gone is in the opposite direction with pushback and clapback and these kind of McCarthyistic, Putinistic, Trumpistic, clampdowns on freedom of discussion. So we have a moral duty to talk about this, whether we like it or not. Just because one does not believe in white privilege does not mean that one does not benefit from white privilege. And there are kind of documented instances of what white privilege is. White privilege is taught in the classroom. It is an academic construct. And there are actual things that happen to us when we benefit from our white privilege. So to the framers of this, to all of us, I ask, if America is so perfect and so exceptional as to be immune from even talking about these issues or writing books about these issues or teaching classes about these issues or talking about the consequences of our own collective sins, then why not make some amends? If this is done, why not finish it was back then, now is better. Let's finish the process of closure. So why not pay cash reparations to all of the descendants of slavery? Cash reparations out of the common kitty of America. Let's do that. Let's pay reparations. Why not give all land back that is unceded to the descendants of indigenous tribes? Let's give every parcel of land that was not negotiated in a treaty back. Let's give it all back. Let's give the land back. Let's pay cash reparations to the slaves. I mean, if it's a done deal, pay reparations, give the land back that was clearly stolen and not negotiated. And I'm not an Indigenous studies scholar, and I don't have a map. I can't show you on a map. I bet somebody's made a map of how much land we'd actually be allowed to still have as the descendants of the colonizer. Okay. If white privilege isn't real, let's abolish all inheritance. Nope. No trust fund. Sorry. No startup for your multi-billion-dollar corporation from your multi-billionaire parents. Abolish all private inheritance. Take all of that money and redistribute it like Jesus would have done, or like, the commies would have done, and put that into the common pool to take care of the needy, to create universal health care, to create universally basic income, to build the vital infrastructure, healthcare, hospitals, roads, public transportation that we need to survive climate change. We need a network of free trains all over this continent. If white privilege doesn't exist, at least abolish the most obvious aspect of white privilege, which is private inheritance. For all disclosure, I am benefiting today from being a white guy descended from other white people who had money, and they helped me with expenses. So, I mean, like I'm not the person getting reparations. I'm living on land that once belonged to other people, so let me be clear, like I'm a beneficiary of white privilege and white racism and anti-Black racism. Okay, where are our bootstraps now? Maybe this isn't really about back then. Maybe this is about maintaining current power relationships. Maybe this is about some folks who benefit a lot more than me because I'm just a teacher and I live a fairly modest middle-class existence. I'm not really rolling in the dough. Maybe this is about folks who benefit from white privilege and systemic racism right now. And if me as a middle-class teacher, I benefit a lot, think how much more the people above me in the pecking order in the 1% benefit. The last few years, we have been living in a lifetime of what if you had lived back then moments. What if you had been alive during the Civil Rights Movement? What if you had been alive during the Vietnam War? What if you had been alive during the Civil War? What would you have done? We're living through one of those times now. We live now, and what are we doing? And so I didn't ask for this. I didn't write this law. I didn't invite this fight. And this law comes sailing across my reality, this Divisive Concepts law. During the hearing on this, one of the legislators asked about the beatdown on the bridge at Selma. My father went to Turnaround Tuesday. I marched with my students. I took my students on an official school trip to the Selma Bridge. We went to the Selma Bridge together to march to remember what systemic racism looked like in practice, which was beating in the heads of Black people who wanted to vote. And so this man asked the legislator, can we still teach students about that? And he said, why, of course, was the reply. We like history, they imply. We have more responsibility than to just tell folks that this happened. We need to help folks understand why this happened. It happened because of generations of anti-Black racist police practices propped up by the Church of the Deep South and by the political powers of the Deep South. One year in the Martin Luther King Jr. class, we were talking about the theology underwriting King's teachings and the civil rights movement, and then the civil rights legislation that gets passed in the mid-60s, which was the result of King's grassroots, radical nonviolent movement. An older gentleman asked me very, very earnestly, and he said, after this, did any churches continue to use the church teaching to justify racism? I didn't have a good pat answer at the time, but then I went and got out a book called Mississippi Praying, and I studied the theology of the white citizens' councils in the 1950s and 1960s. The church was the main place where white supremacy was being taught and theologized. Before it was weaponized, it was theologized. White supremacy and anti-Black racism was being taught in white churches throughout the South. Today, the Trumpist nationalist narrative, the CRT panic, is coming out of white churches. It's in the church. The church is not teaching Kingian beloved community except for the liberal mainline church. Now, thank goodness, the Christian left is alive and well. I was until very, very recently a card-carrying member of the Christian left. I was a pastor and preacher in the Presbyterian Church USA, which has very progressive statements on all topics of social justice. I'm a liberation theologian who's Christian adjacent now. I still talk to Jesus, and I'm currently hanging out in a Unitarian Universalist church. But theologically speaking, one of the greatest criminals, one of the greatest perpetrators of anti-Black white supremacy in this country is white Christianity. And it didn't go away because Dr. King taught us about how wrong it was. If we do not teach about anti-Black racism and the religious and political narratives that promote it, then we can forget about the bridge at Selma. Let me say this again. If we do not teach about anti-Black racism or the religious and political narratives that promote it, we can forget about the bridge at Selma. Those marchers took those blows in vain. If we do not only say what happened, but why it happened. It is not enough that we ourselves as contemporary white folks did not wield those batons at Selma. This law is a baton beating on Black students, Black faculty, Black staff at the public universities. Don't mince words. If we look at the current problems with policing in prisons, we know that this is not just history. This is now because we continually fail at truly addressing the problem. And those professors who are actively and conscientiously addressing the problems have just been told on paper by a law that what you do is illegal because it is divisive. It is not enough that these legislators themselves didn't wield the batons, themselves did not kneel on George Floyd's neck. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of a society produces cops that kneel on George Floyd's neck, not to mention all the other countless murders committed by police against civilians in the United States, against Black and white civilians in the United States. This law, if passed, sailed through the House on Monday last. The numbers are better. It's going to sail through the Senate on Monday forward. This law is a baton to beat back the possibility of justice. This law is a baton to beat back the possibility of reparations. This law is a baton to beat back any prefigurative act of healing that could make the beloved community possible. The very kumbaya unity, it's all right, it's okay, that this law seems to want in its fantasy world could be won by beloved community, could be won by reparations, could be won by confessing the collective sin of systemic anti-Black white racism, white supremacy. Instead, this law beats the mind of teachers. It beats the mind of students. It beats the mind of staff into submission of a fantasy world. And where we as teachers, faculty, and staff would only be complicit and obedient tools in the erroneous continuation of anti-Blackness and white supremacy. This law is a sin. So all you Christian legislators, you will please get on your knees and pray to your Jesus about this law before it becomes a reality. Governor Lee, before you sign this law, you claim to love a resurrected Palestinian laborer who organized the disciples, the working fisher people of his day, in a revolt against a Roman occupation. You claim to follow this guy. Get with him. Look at what he taught. Your gospel, the gospel is a divisive concept. Love is a divisive concept when brought on a world that doesn't know how to love. This law ain't it. This law is a lie. It's built on a lie. The law breaks its own law, and it would require me either to be in open defiance of the law or to just duck and hope I don't get caught. But if those of us who work in this industry go forward after this law passes, which it looks like it's going to, we are going to challenge it in the courts, hopefully. And hopefully the federal judges will strike this thing down. But if we go forward telling the truth, we were going to be in just my syllabus will be against the law with this divisive concept law. This law is a fantasy. It's a house of cards. It creates a world that does not exist for the sake of a political narrative that is problematic and erroneous at its core. So I beg of you to talk about this, share this video with your friends, talk to your legislatures in Tennessee. That's probably not going to work. Talk to your colleagues at your universities if you work in Tennessee public higher ed. Talk to your neighbors, people at church and the community center, because it sounds naive what King said anymore, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But I still have kind of placed my hope and my reality in that we can overcome, that we will overcome, that we shall overcome, and we overcome by fighting nonviolently and peacefully against the lies and the racism that this terrible law is built upon. Thank you. I'm Andrew Smith. Thanks for coming to my video. I appreciate everyone who listened and all the comments. Have a good day. Happy for those of us at Tennessee Tech, happy spring break. For those of you at the other schools that are finishing spring break, I hope you had a meaningful spring break. And stay tuned for more of these videos as this law progresses and the more legislation comes forward.